My husband divorced me when I was pregnant. Not after the baby was born, not after we had time to talk, adjust, or figure things out, while I was still carrying his child. And the craziest part? He thought he was winning. He thought he was finally free. Free of responsibility, free of me, free of what he called dead weight. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that by the time he walked away, everything he thought he was taking was already poison. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because to understand how we ended up here, you need to know who I was before the pregnancy, before the divorce papers, before the silence settled into our house like permanent fog. My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 32 years old, and until 4 months ago, I was married to a man named Eric Carter. We were together for 12 years, married for 9. That's not a fling, that's not a mistake, that's a whole adult life built with someone you think will be there when things get hard. I met Eric when I was 20. I was in my second year of college, working part-time at a campus bookstore, barely sleeping, living off coffee and hope. Eric was 26, already working in logistics management, already talking about long-term goals and building something. He liked that I listened. He liked that I was steady. He liked that I believed in him. People always say, "You changed." But the truth is, I didn't. He did. We married when I was 23. Small wedding, nothing fancy, just family, friends, and promises we thought meant something. The first few years were fine. Not perfect, not magical, but stable. I worked in HR. Eric climbed the ladder at his company. We bought a modest house in the suburbs, nothing flashy, but ours. When I turned 29, we started talking about kids. Or rather, I started talking. Eric always said things like, "Not yet. Let's wait until things settle. Kids change everything." I believed him. I always did. Then, last year, something shifted. He started staying later at work, started checking his phone more, started responding with irritation instead of conversation. When I asked what was wrong, he'd say, "I'm just tired. You worry too much. Can we not do this right now?" I told myself it was stress. I told myself every marriage goes through seasons. Then, 3 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor staring at the test in my shaking hands. Positive. I wasn't scared. I was hopeful. I imagined Eric smiling, imagined us finally becoming the family we talked about for years. I wrapped the test in tissue, placed it in a gift box, and waited for him to come home. When I told him, he didn't smile. He stared at the box, then at me, then he sighed. Not a happy sigh, a tired one. "This isn't planned," he said. "I know," I replied, trying to stay calm. "But we talked about kids." "Eventually," he said. "Not now." That was the first crack. Over the next few weeks, Eric grew distant. He didn't touch my belly, didn't come to appointments, didn't ask questions. When I mentioned baby names, he'd change the subject. When I talked about the future, he talked about finances. Then one night, after dinner, while I was still washing dishes, he said it. "I don't think this is what I want anymore." I turned around, soap still on my hands. "What?" I asked. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely. "The marriage, the timing, the baby." I felt something drop inside my chest. "You're saying what?" I whispered. "I think we rushed into everything," he said, "and now it's too late to fix." That was the night he moved into the guest room. 2 weeks later, he asked for a divorce. While I was 10 weeks pregnant, He slid the papers across the table like he was handing me a receipt. "I'll take the house," he said. "I'll keep my accounts. You can move in with your sister until you figure things out." He paused, then added, "I'll pay child support. I'm not heartless." I didn't cry. Not then. I just stared at him, realizing something terrifying. He had already decided. What he didn't realize was that he had just asked for everything that would destroy him, and I was about to let him have it. The day after Eric asked for the divorce, I woke up alone in our bed. Not because he'd left the house, but because he'd decided I no longer belonged in the room we once shared. He was already awake when I stepped into the hallway, dressed, calm, focused, like this was just another item on his to-do list. "I think it's better if you use the guest room for now," he said, not unkindly, but not apologetically either. For space. Space. I was carrying his child, and somehow I was the one who needed space. The guest room was small. A twin bed, one dresser drawer. It smelled like dust and old paint. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the house make unfamiliar noises. The house I thought was my home suddenly felt like borrowed property. Over the next few days, Eric became efficient. He sent emails instead of talking, text messages instead of conversations. He scheduled things, meetings with lawyers, appointments with a mediator, times when he'd be out. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he didn't need to, because he believed he had already won. I noticed small things first. My access to our joint credit card stopped working. When I asked about it, he said, "We need to start separating finances. It's cleaner." Cleaner. Then the grocery budget needed adjusting. Then he suggested I should probably start packing some of my things. Just the essentials, he said, so it's easier later. Later. I was nauseous most mornings, exhausted by noon, crying quietly in the shower so he wouldn't hear. Pregnancy has a way of making everything louder, your fears, your instincts, your awareness. And something in my gut told me this wasn't just a man leaving. This was a man positioning himself. A week after the papers were filed, his mother showed up. Linda Carter. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect disappointment. She hugged me stiffly, like we were distant relatives instead of family. "I'm so sorry things turned out this way," she said, patting my arm. "But marriages take work, especially for men." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I was too tired to fight. She walked through the house slowly, evaluating everything with her eyes. The furniture, the walls, the kitchen. Then she said, "Eric will need stability during this transition." I stared at her. "I'm pregnant," I said quietly. She smiled. "Yes, well, babies need stability too, and Eric is very busy right now." That was when I understood. They had already rewritten the story. I wasn't a wife being abandoned while pregnant. I was a complication, a delay, a problem to be managed. 2 weeks later, Eric brought her over. The woman. Her name was Madison. She was younger than me. Loud in that effortless way. Always smiling. She didn't look at me when she walked into the house. She looked around, like she was already imagining changes. "I just want everyone to be comfortable," Eric said, standing between us like a mediator in his own betrayal. Madison stayed for dinner. At my table, eating the food I cooked because my body still craved routine. She talked about her yoga classes, her travel plans, her fresh start. I sat quietly, one hand resting on my stomach, wondering how my life had become background noise. That night, I cried for the first time. Not loudly, silently, because the baby kicked. And I realized I wasn't just losing a marriage. I was fighting to protect a future. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Rachel Monroe, early 50s. Sharp eyes, no nonsense. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Your husband is moving fast." "Yes," I said. "And he's confident," she added. "Yes." She leaned back in her chair. "That usually means one of two things. He's either very prepared or very sloppy." I didn't respond, because 3 years earlier, I had noticed something strange. Back when Eric still let me help with household finances. Back when he trusted me. I had seen numbers that didn't add up. Transfers, loans, credit lines I didn't recognize. At the time, I assumed I didn't understand the full picture. I told myself he knew what he was doing. But pregnancy has a way of sharpening memory, and suddenly those moments replayed themselves in my mind. Rachel slid a legal pad toward me. "We need full financial disclosure," she said. "Everything." I nodded. "I can get it," I replied. She paused. "You sound very certain." "I am." What I didn't tell her, what I hadn't told anyone, was that for years I had kept copies, old statements, emails, documents Eric assumed I'd forget. Not because I was plotting, but because something in me never fully relaxed. My grandmother used to say, "Never confuse trust with blindness." I didn't confront Eric. I didn't accuse. Instead, I did what he least expected. I became cooperative. I stopped asking questions, stopped pushing back, stopped reacting. When he said he wanted the house, I said, "Okay." When he said he'd keep the accounts, I said, "I understand." When he said he was being generous, I said nothing. He relaxed. That's what men like Eric do when they think they're in control. They stop checking their mirrors. They stop guarding their backs. And while he was busy planning his clean exit, I was quietly preparing to let him walk away with exactly what he asked for. Every single burden, every hidden weight, every lie he'd built his confidence on, and he had no idea. People treat pregnant women like they're fragile glass. They lower their voices, offer unsolicited advice, tell you to take it easy. What they don't realize is that pregnancy also makes you fiercely alert. Every instinct sharpens, every lie feels louder, every shift in behavior registers. Eric thought my silence meant defeat. Everyone did. Friends started calling less, family tiptoed around conversations. Most people didn't know what to say to a woman whose husband had left her while she was pregnant. Some assumed there had to be more to the story. Others assumed I'd done something wrong. One person, however, was always there. My best friend, Lauren. We'd known each other since college, shared apartments, breakups, late-night confessions. She was the first person I called after Eric asked for the divorce. She cried with me, sat on the floor of my guest room while I folded clothes into boxes. "You don't deserve this," she said over and over. "He's disgusting." She brought soup when my nausea was bad, texted me every morning asking how I felt. But something felt off. Small things. Eric seemed to know things I hadn't told him. When I mentioned to Lauren that I might ask for temporary spousal support, Eric brought it up unprompted the next day. When I said I was considering staying in the house until the baby was born, he already had counter-arguments prepared. Too prepared. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Stress does that. But then one afternoon, Lauren casually said, "Eric's just scared. He's under a lot of pressure." I froze. "How do you know that?" I asked. She shrugged. "He mentioned it." I stared at her. "When did you talk to Eric?" She smiled nervously. "Oh, he reached out, wanted to make sure you were okay." That night, I lay awake again. Not because of nausea, because something finally clicked. Lauren wasn't just supporting me. She was reporting. And Eric, in his arrogance, assumed I was too emotional to notice. I didn't confront her. I didn't pull away. I did something smarter. I let her believe she was needed. I told her things. Not real things. I mentioned plans I had no intention of following, concerns I wasn't actually worried about, and within days, Eric reacted exactly as expected. That was when I knew. My circle had been compromised, so I tightened it. Rachel, my lawyer, became my anchor. We met weekly. Quiet meetings, no drama, just documents. She reviewed everything I brought her. Mortgage statements, business credit lines, personal guarantees Eric had signed without telling me. "Does he know you have this?" she asked. "No," I replied. She nodded slowly. "That's good." Meanwhile, Eric's behavior grew more confident. He stopped pretending to be kind, started making comments like, "I don't want this to get ugly. Be reasonable. This could be worse for you." He talked about custody like it was a negotiation tactic. "I'll be generous," he said once. "Most men wouldn't be." I said nothing, because generosity from someone who wants control is never real. As my pregnancy progressed, my body slowed down, but my mind didn't. I documented everything: texts, emails, voicemails, dates, times, patterns. Eric underestimated me in the most dangerous way. He thought pregnancy made me weak. He thought silence meant surrender. In reality, I was gathering proof. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone in the other room, laughing, confident. "I'm getting the house, the accounts, everything," he said. "She didn't even fight." That was the moment I fully committed. Not to revenge, to precision. I stopped trying to be understood. I stopped trying to correct the narrative. I let him believe the version of me he needed to believe in order to make mistakes. Rachel finalized our strategy. "You're entitled to half," she said. "The house, the assets, the business." I shook my head. "I don't want half," I replied. She looked at me carefully. "What do you want?" "I want out," I said, "and I want my child protected." She studied my face. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Do you understand what you're walking away from?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Do you understand what he's taking?" Rachel smiled. Slowly, carefully. "That," she said, "is a very different conversation." We began structuring everything around that reality. If Eric wanted the house, he'd get it, along with the debt attached to it. If he wanted the accounts, he'd assume the liabilities too. Every line item, every obligation. All disclosed, all legal. I wasn't hiding anything. I was letting the truth speak for itself. As my second trimester began, Eric moved forward aggressively. He brought Madison around more often, started redecorating, claiming space, claiming ownership. I packed quietly, not because I was being pushed out, but because I was preparing for a clean exit. At night, I'd place my hand on my belly and whisper promises. "I've got you," I'd say. "I'm not losing." And I meant it. Because while Eric was celebrating his freedom, I was about to give him everything he thought he wanted. And soon, very soon, he would realize the cost. By the time I was 5 months pregnant, I no longer lived in my own home. Not officially, anyway. Eric didn't throw me out. That would have looked bad. Instead, he framed it as concern. "I just think it'll be less stressful for you," he said, standing in the doorway of the guest room, "with the baby coming and everything." Stress. As if watching another woman sit in my living room wasn't stressful. As if carrying his child while negotiating my own erasure wasn't stressful. I moved into a small apartment across town. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. The kitchen so narrow I could touch both counters at once. It wasn't glamorous, But it was quiet, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. Eric helped me move, another performance for the audience. He carried boxes, asked if I needed anything, told neighbors he was doing his best. I smiled politely. I said thank you. I let him feel generous. The public story was simple. Eric and I had grown apart. The pregnancy was unexpected. He was stepping up. People nodded. People always nod at the version that makes them comfortable. My phone buzzed constantly with advice. You should fight him. You should take him for everything. You're being too soft. They didn't understand. They thought strength looked like shouting. They didn't realize I was choosing silence on purpose. At my prenatal appointments, the nurses always asked where my husband was. Work, I'd say. They gave me that look. The one that said everything without saying anything at all. At night, I lay awake in my new apartment, hand on my belly, feeling the baby move. Life growing, while everything else fell away. Eric, meanwhile, was thriving, or so it seemed. Social media told the story he wanted told. Photos of dinners out, weekend trips, captions about new beginnings. Madison appeared in more and more of them, always smiling, always polished. She started posting pictures from the house. My house. New throw pillows, fresh paint, a different energy. She painted the kitchen white. I'd chosen that color after months of debating shades. It reminded me of warmth. She replaced it with sterile brightness. Fitting. Eric texted occasionally, short messages. Need you to sign this. Lawyer says we're close. No check-ins, no curiosity, just logistics. At mediation, he leaned back in his chair like a man watching a deal close. I sat quietly, visibly pregnant, hands folded. When asked what I wanted, I said, I just want enough to start over. The mediator glanced at Eric. He nodded. Gracious, he said. Of course. Rachel sat beside me, unreadable. Under the table, she squeezed my hand once. Eric offered a modest settlement. Cash, no assets. I accepted. He looked surprised, then relieved. He thought I was folding. He didn't notice the footnotes, didn't read the attachments, didn't ask questions. Why would he? He'd already decided I was defeated. At one point, his lawyer hesitated. Eric, he said carefully, we should review the full financial picture before... Eric waved him off. He said, I know my business. We're good. Confidence is dangerous when it's unearned. Outside the mediation room, Madison waited. She smiled at me when I walked past her. A polite smile. A victorious one. I smiled back, not because I was being kind, but because I knew something she didn't. The further along my pregnancy progressed, the clearer everything became. The baby kicked stronger. My resolve hardened. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was protecting a future. Rachel finalized the documents. Everything Eric wanted was listed clearly. The house, the accounts, the business interests. And attached to them, every responsibility, every debt, every obligation. Nothing hidden, nothing illegal, just the truth. The night before the final hearing, Eric texted me. I appreciate you not making this harder than it has to be. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, I just want peace. It wasn't a lie. I did want peace. I just knew where it would come from. The morning of the hearing, I wore a simple dress. No jewelry, no makeup beyond the basics. I looked tired. That helped. Eric arrived early, confident, relaxed. His lawyer looked tense. Eric didn't notice. Madison waited outside, scrolling on her phone. His mother sat in the gallery, arms crossed, satisfied. When the judge reviewed the agreement, she paused, looked at me. You understand what you're agreeing to? She asked. Yes, I said. And you're choosing this freely? Yes. She nodded. Then she turned to Eric. He smiled. The papers were passed, signatures placed, pens lifted, and with every stroke of ink, Eric sealed his future without realizing it, because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can take is exactly what you asked for. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Not silent, just subdued. The kind of quiet that settles when people think they already know how something will end. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Eric adjusted his jacket, confident, composed. He looked like a man about to collect a reward. I looked like a woman who had already lost, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The clerk began distributing the finalized documents, page after page, legal language, sign here, initial here. Eric signed quickly, too quickly, like someone eager to be done. I signed slowly, not out of hesitation, out of intention. With every signature, I felt something inside me steady. This wasn't fear, this was release. When the last page was signed, the judge looked up. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you understand that by accepting these assets, you are assuming full responsibility for all associated liabilities?" Eric nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Your Honor." She glanced at his lawyer. He shifted in his seat. "Counsel, do you confirm your client understands the scope of this agreement?" There was a pause. A small one, but I noticed. "Yes, Your Honor," the lawyer said carefully. The judge nodded. "Very well." That should have been the end, but as the clerk gathered the papers, Eric's lawyer stopped her. "Your Honor," he said, clearing his throat, "for the record, I need to confirm one point with my client." Eric frowned, annoyed. "Can we not?" he whispered. The lawyer leaned closer. "Eric," he said quietly, "the liability disclosure." Eric waved him off. "I know what I'm signing." The judge looked up sharply. "Is there a concern, counsel?" The lawyer hesitated. Then he spoke. "Your Honor, the disclosure indicates significant debt attached to the assets being transferred." The room shifted. Eric stiffened. "What debt?" he asked, laughing lightly. "That's just standard language." The lawyer didn't smile. "Eric," he said, lowering his voice, "the house has multiple liens." Eric turned to him slowly. "That's not right." "The business carries outstanding credit obligations," the lawyer continued, "and personal guarantees." Eric's face changed. Not panic yet, confusion. "You said everything was fine," Eric snapped. "I advised a full audit," the lawyer replied calmly. "You declined." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Carter," she said, "are you disputing the accuracy of the financial disclosures attached to this agreement?" Eric stood abruptly. "Yes," he said. This isn't what I agreed to." The judge's expression hardened. "You signed an agreement acknowledging full disclosure." Eric turned to me. His eyes searched my face. "You knew about this." His voice wasn't angry. It was shaken. I met his gaze. "I worked with the numbers for years," I said evenly. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Carter," she said, "are you stating under oath that you were unaware of your own financial obligations?" Eric opened his mouth, closed it. His lawyer spoke instead. "Your Honor, my client declined a financial review despite recommendation." He reached into his folder, produced a document, a waiver, signed. Eric's signature sat at the bottom, bold, careless. The judge reviewed it, then looked at Eric. "You were advised to investigate. You chose not to." Eric's confidence collapsed in real time. His shoulders sagged. His breathing quickened. "This isn't fair," She hid this." The judge's voice was sharp. "Mr. Carter, these debts are attached to assets you requested." She paused. "You insisted on receiving everything." Silence filled the room. The judge continued. "The agreement stands." The gavel came down. Final. Eric sat heavily in his chair. His hands shook. The man who'd walked in expecting victory now looked like someone who'd just realized the ground beneath him wasn't solid. I stood, smoothed my dress. The judge nodded at me. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "your settlement is approved." I picked up my purse. Eric looked up at me. "You planned this," he said quietly. I didn't deny it. I didn't gloat. I just said, "You asked for everything." Then I turned and walked out. In the hallway, Madison stood frozen. Her smile was gone. She looked at Eric through the glass. Really looked. Not at the image, at the reality. I didn't stay to watch her leave. I didn't need to. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. I placed my hand on my stomach. The baby kicked. And for the first time since the divorce began, I felt free. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It never does. It starts with silence. The kind of silence that follows shock, when someone is still trying to convince themselves that what just happened can be undone. Eric didn't chase me out of the courthouse. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just sat there, staring at papers that no longer felt like victory. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A message from his lawyer. "Please have your counsel contact me." I didn't respond. Rachel would handle it. That was the point. I went back to my apartment and lay down on the couch, exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. Not from fear, from release. For months, I'd been bracing myself, holding everything together with careful restraint. And now, there was nothing left to hold. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Then the calls started. Eric's mother left a voicemail. Her tone had changed. No longer sharp, no longer certain. "We need to talk," she said. "There's been a misunderstanding." I didn't call back. Madison posted nothing. Her social media went dark overnight. That told me more than any explanation could. Within a week, the narrative shifted. Eric's coworkers stopped congratulating him. Questions started circulating. The house, his house, went on the market. Then quietly came off. Price dropped, then dropped again. No buyers. Because debt has a way of revealing itself. The business began missing payments. Vendors followed up, then followed through. Eric called me once. I didn't answer. He left a message. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I didn't know it was this bad." I listened to the voicemail once, then deleted it. Because ignorance isn't innocence, and excuses don't erase choices. Meanwhile, my life became smaller, but steadier. I nested in my apartment, folded baby clothes, set up a crib in the corner of the bedroom. My sister came by every weekend. She didn't ask questions. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just helped. At my next prenatal appointment, the nurse smiled when she heard the baby's heartbeat. Strong. Steady. I felt tears prick my eyes. Not from sadness, from relief. Eric's tried again a month later. This time in person. He showed up outside my apartment, unannounced. He looked different. Thinner. Tired. The confidence that once filled every room he entered was gone. "I just want to talk," he said. I stood in the doorway, didn't invite him in. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied. He swallowed. "I made mistakes." "Yes," I said. "I didn't think you'd actually walk away," he added. That was the truth. Not the debt, not the business. That. He thought I'd always stay. "I'm pregnant," I said calmly. "I don't have the energy to manage your regret." He nodded slowly. "I'll still be there for the baby." "I hope so," I said. "But that's not my responsibility anymore." When I closed the door, my hands shook. Not from fear, from finality. Some endings are loud. This one was quiet and permanent. The months passed. The pregnancy progressed. Eric filed for restructuring, then bankruptcy. The house went into foreclosure. The business dissolved. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I focused on what mattered: my child, my health, my future. One evening, as I sat in the nursery I'd created from almost nothing, I realized something. I wasn't starting over, I was starting fresh. There's a difference. Starting over implies failure. Starting fresh implies choice. I'd chosen peace, and it had cost him everything he thought defined him. But it had given me something better: clarity, strength, freedom. And as I felt the baby shift inside me, I whispered the truth out loud for the first time. We're going to be okay. And for the first time, I believed it. Labor started at 3 in the morning. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a quiet, steady tightening that pulled me out of sleep and into reality. I sat on the edge of my bed, one hand on my stomach, the other on my phone, timing contractions the way the nurse had taught me. 5 minutes apart, then 4, then 3. I called my sister. She answered on the first ring. "I'm on my way," she said. I didn't call Eric, not because I wanted to punish him, but because he had already chosen distance long before this moment. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. Paperwork, monitors, bright lights. As they wheeled me into the delivery room, I felt fear rise in my chest. Not about the pain, about doing this alone. The nurse squeezed my hand. "You're doing great," she said. And somehow, that was enough. After 12 hours of labor, my daughter was born. She cried immediately. Strong lungs, strong will. They placed her on my chest, warm and perfect and real. In that moment, the last thread tying me to my old life snapped. This was my center now. Everything else was background. Eric showed up the next day, late afternoon. He stood awkwardly near the door, holding flowers that looked like an afterthought. He looked at our daughter with something like wonder and fear. "She's beautiful," he said. "Yes," I replied. He asked if he could hold her. I nodded, because she deserved a father who tried, even if imperfectly. He held her carefully, too carefully, like he was afraid she'd break or that she'd reject him. "I want to do better," he said quietly. "For her." I didn't argue. I didn't reassure. I just said, "That's between you and her." After that, we settled into a rhythm, a distant one. Eric sent child support, on time. He visited twice a month, supervised at first, then slowly more relaxed. We didn't fight. We didn't talk beyond logistics, and that seemed to frustrate him more than anger ever could. He tried one last time when our daughter was 6 months old. He asked if we could talk about us. "I've changed," he said. "I've lost everything. It made me see clearly." I looked at him across the table, at the man who once believed silence meant weakness, at the man who had mistaken my patience for submission. "I didn't leave because you lost money," I said calmly. "I left because you lost respect." He nodded, but he didn't truly understand, and that was okay. Because closure doesn't require agreement, it requires acceptance. I paid off my small debts, went back to work part-time, built routines, built peace. And slowly, quietly, I became someone new. Not hardened, not bitter, just awake. Eric stopped asking, stopped pushing. Eventually, he stopped hoping. And that was the final gift he gave me. Space. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't knock on the door and announce itself. It sneaks in quietly, between feedings, during late-night rocking sessions, in the moments when you realize your chest doesn't feel tight anymore. At first, I thought I was just surviving, keeping my daughter fed, keeping the lights on, keeping my emotions in check. But somewhere between her first laugh and her first time sleeping through the night, I noticed something. I was breathing easier. Not because life had become simple, but because it had become honest. There were no performances anymore, no pretending, no shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. Motherhood grounded me in a way nothing else ever had. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. I stopped replaying the past, stopped wondering what I could have done differently, because the truth became clear with time. I didn't lose a husband. I lost an illusion. Eric faded into the background of my life, still present, still responsible, but no longer powerful. And that shift, quiet, subtle, was the most freeing thing of all. I enrolled in certification courses I'd put off for years, updated my resume, took small consulting contracts. Nothing glamorous, just honest work. Work that belonged to me. At night, after my daughter fell asleep, I'd sit at the small kitchen table and plan. Not out of desperation, out of intention. I learned something important during that time. People had underestimated me for years. Not just Eric, everyone. They saw patience and mistook it for weakness, saw kindness and assumed compliance, saw silence and assumed surrender. I stopped correcting them because being underestimated had protected me. It had given me room to move. One afternoon, almost 2 years after the divorce, I ran into Eric at a grocery store. He looked normal. Not broken, not triumphant, just human. We exchanged polite words. He asked about our daughter. I answered. Then he said something unexpected. "You were stronger than I ever gave you credit for." I smiled. Not out of pride, out of closure. Strength doesn't need recognition to exist. I walked away knowing something he might never fully grasp. Losing me wasn't his punishment, it was his consequence. And mine? Mine was freedom. There's a moment that comes after everything is over, after the lawyers stop calling, after the paperwork is filed away, after people stop asking if you're okay. It's the moment when you're alone with yourself. No crisis, no adrenaline, just truth. For a long time, I thought survival was the goal. Get through the pregnancy, get through the divorce, get through the loneliness. But survival is only the beginning. What comes after is understanding. And that part is harder because it forces you to look at the patterns you ignored, the compromises you justified, the ways you made yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I used to think love meant endurance, that if you stayed long enough, sacrificed enough, proved yourself enough, eventually you'd be chosen. That belief cost me years, not because it was wrong to love, but because it was wrong to disappear. I think about the woman I was when I found out I was pregnant. Hopeful, trusting, certain that love would rise to meet responsibility. No one tells you that sometimes responsibility exposes character instead of strengthening it. Eric didn't leave because of the baby. He left because the baby forced him to face who he really was. And instead of rising, he ran. That wasn't my failure. It was his truth. If you're watching this and you're in the middle of something similar, pregnant, abandoned, underestimated, I need you to hear this clearly. Silence does not mean weakness. Waiting does not mean losing, and walking away does not mean you failed. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is stop explaining herself, stop proving, stop begging someone to see her worth. Because people who benefit from your silence will always call it submission until the moment they realize they misunderstood it. I didn't win because I was smarter. I won because I paid attention. I listened when things didn't add up. I protected myself when I felt uneasy. And when the moment came, I trusted my judgment instead of my fear. The world likes neat stories, heroes and villains, right and wrong. But real life is quieter, more complicated, and much more revealing. What happened to me wasn't revenge, it was consequence. Eric took everything he asked for and learned, too late, that not everything is an asset. Some things are liabilities disguised as victories. I didn't take anything from him. I let him take it himself, and then I stepped out of the way. Today, my life is smaller on paper, but fuller in every way that matters. My daughter knows peace. She knows consistency. She knows a mother who stands tall without raising her voice. And that matters more than any house, any title, any image ever could. If there's one lesson I hope you take from my story, it's this. Never confuse someone's confidence with their competence, and never confuse your patience with powerlessness. Because sometimes the woman everyone thinks has lost everything is the only one who walks away free. People think closure looks like an apology, like someone showing up years later, tears in their eyes, finally saying the words you waited for. I was wrong. I'm sorry. You deserved better. But real closure? Real closure is quieter than that. It's waking up one morning and realizing you're no longer angry, no longer waiting, no longer replaying conversations in your head, wondering what you could have said differently. It's realizing the story has ended, even if the other person is still stuck on the same page. Years have passed now. My daughter is old enough to ask questions, not about the divorce, about life. Why do you always tell me to trust myself? She asked me once, sitting at the kitchen table while I cut fruit. I thought about it for a moment, because children deserve answers that don't poison them with adult pain. Because your voice matters, I said, and because you don't need permission to be whole. She nodded like it made perfect sense. Children always understand truth faster than adults do. Eric is still around, in the background. He shows up when scheduled. He tries, in his own limited way. I don't interfere. I don't control. I let reality teach what I no longer need to explain. That's another thing I learned. You don't have to convince people of the truth. If it's real, it eventually introduces itself. There was a time when I thought my life had collapsed, when I was pregnant, alone, sitting in a nearly empty apartment, wondering how everything I'd built disappeared so quickly. But looking back now, I see it differently. My life didn't collapse. It shed weight. It let go of what couldn't survive honesty. It made room. Room for peace, room for growth, room for a version of me that no longer apologized for existing. I think about that woman often. The one people pitied, the one they whispered about, the one they thought had been left. They didn't see what I was gaining. They didn't see that I was walking away from instability, disrespect, and a future built on illusion. They didn't see that sometimes loss is just the truth finally being spoken out loud. If you're listening to this and you feel like everything is falling apart, especially if you're pregnant, vulnerable, or standing at the edge of a life you didn't choose, I want you to remember this. You don't need to rush your healing. You don't need to prove your strength, and you don't need to explain your silence. The world is loud. It demands reactions. But some of the most powerful decisions are made quietly, behind closed doors, with patience, with clarity, with self-respect. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I didn't beg. I simply stopped participating in a story that required me to disappear. And when I did, everything changed. Today, my life is not perfect, but it is honest. And honesty is lighter than perfection ever was. I wake up knowing who I am. I go to sleep knowing I didn't abandon myself to keep someone else comfortable. And that kind of peace, it's priceless. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never underestimate a woman who goes quiet, not because she's broken, but because she's thinking. Because sometimes the longest game isn't about revenge, it's about freedom. And sometimes the woman everyone thought had lost everything is the only one who truly won. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. You never know whose life might change because they finally realized silence is not surrender. It's strategy. And walking away with peace is the greatest victory of all.